Gareth. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today at our Capitol building here in Harrisburg, as well as virtually on Zoom for an important discussion on access to mail-in voting and absentee ballots. I'm State Senator Katie Muth. I represent Senate District 44, which is parts of Chester, Berks, and Montgomery counties, and I am honored to be here today co-hosting this hearing as our policy committee chair for our caucus with Senator Cappelletti, who is the chair of the Senate State Government Committee for the Democrats, and we also have Senator Judy Schwank, who is joining us virtually today as well. Today's hearing, we will feature two panels of testimony that will include perspectives from local government officials and voting rights advocacy groups to discuss the different election policies and procedures in place across the counties of our Commonwealth and how the state government can play a role in improving these processes. The ability to cast a vote is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. And we know that 41 days away, we have a very important election, although I'd argue every single election we have is very important. But we want to make sure that every election we have is safe, secure, reliable, and transparent. According to census data and information from the Pennsylvania Department of State, Pennsylvania has 8.8 million registered voters. If that number's off a little, maybe someone registered yesterday, so it could be off by a slight. But the total number of eligible voters in the Commonwealth is actually 10.3. So hopefully we can get closer to that number as more people sign up to vote. I will turn it over to Senator Cappelletti for opening remarks. And again, thank you for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Muth, and thank you everybody for being here today. As was noted, today's discussion is both timely and important. As we are less than 6 weeks away from the next general election, voters in Pennsylvania need to know about what options are available to them and how they can vote to ensure that their voice is heard. I'm truly passionate about today's topic of mail-in ballots and absentee ballots because both have come in handy for my family. When my husband Greg was serving in the military overseas, he voted by absentee ballot. And when we were in the midst of the pandemic, I took advantage of the opportunity to vote by mail like so many of my neighbors and constituents. And my niece currently goes to school in Georgia and uses the absentee ballot to vote when she's not able to come home. To this day, many Pennsylvanians continue to opt to vote by mail because it allows them the opportunity to participate in our elections and have the flexibility to go to work, care for their children, and so much more. First and foremost, my priority continues to be expanding access to the ballot, streamlining our election processes, and supporting the counties and poll workers that put in many diligent hours to ensure we have a free and fair election process here in the Commonwealth. I'm looking forward to learning more from our testifiers about how we can remove some of the barriers that both voters and county election workers face during the mail-in and absentee ballot process, and learn about the different ways we can work together to ensure that every voice in Pennsylvania is heard, not just in this election, but every election, which I might note happens more or less every 6 months in Pennsylvania, a primary every spring and a general election every November. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Senator Cappelletti. Now we'll turn to Senator Schwank, who is virtually on Zoom. Senator Schwank is our caucus administrator, as well as the minority chair of Agricultural and Rural Affairs, representing Berks County. Senator Schwank, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairwoman Muth, and good morning. I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleagues, of course, Senator Muth and Senator Cappelletti, as well as our panelists, Krista Kerr, James Allen, Philip Hensley Robin, Lauren Costella, and Jeff Reber. I know you all have very busy schedules, especially now, so your participation is greatly appreciated. Despite the nearly 9 million, not quite as we just noted, million registered voters in our Commonwealth, only around 2 to 2.5 million voters participate in our elections. The topic of today's hearing addresses the incredibly significant concern, one that I've heard about firsthand from so many constituents, of the accessibility of no excuse mail-in ballots and absentee ballots in Pennsylvania. There's a clear issue with voter participation and misconceptions about the security of mail-in and absentee ballot practices, and it certainly doesn't aid us in helping to get more people to participate. This doesn't even mention the complexities with successfully attaining and completing a mail-in ballot. Every voter deserves to have fair access in casting their ballot to make their voices heard. As was noted earlier by my colleagues, many people prefer to use a mail-in or absentee ballot because they like to take their time to think about the candidates, to make their selections carefully, and then to be very sure that they follow all of the requirements necessary to successfully complete their ballot. So there's a lot at stake here for a lot of people. And I so appreciate this opportunity as we get closer to the election today to have this hearing and hopefully inform many more people. Again, thank you to my colleagues and to our panelists for their participation. I'm looking forward to hearing a much needed perspective into the real life application and impacts of the practices that the legislature has enacted by these experts, I think, can tell us how our system can be improved. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Senator Schwank. And I just want to say thank you to Senator Schwank and Cappelletti for requesting this. We do represent different counties, all of us collectively. Senator Cappelletti and I share one part of one county, but we really tried to get a good group of testifiers. I want to say thank you in advance to everyone who did agree to participate as we were trying to navigate how to get testifiers to talk about this. So we're honored to have all of you with us today. And as I mentioned, this is live streamed as we speak, but a recording of this hearing will also be available online afterwards for those who couldn't join us in real time at senatormuth.com/policy, and it'll likely be shared to my colleagues' websites as well. And we also have all the written testimony submitted by our testifiers today is publicly accessible, so you can go to senatormuth.com/policy, click on this hearing, and all of the PDFs should be up there so that you can share and also review for yourselves. And our housekeeping tips for testifiers: 5 to 7 minutes. We ask you to sort of summarize what you submitted in advance, and then after the whole panel's done, then we go to Q&A, and members just ask you questions. And that's how the hearing will go. And it's pretty seamless. And I'll try to give you a little wave as you approach your 7-minute mark so that we stay on time. So we will start with our first set of panelists. We have municipal officials. And first, virtually, we have Krista Kerr, who's the Deputy Director of Voter Services from Chester County. And I want to say thank you to her because I had to beg someone, because 60 Minutes is visiting the county today to highlight their election efforts. And I was like, please just join us virtually if you can't be here in person. So honored to have you with us. And Krista, the floor is all yours.
Sorry. I would first like to thank you for inviting Chester County Voter Services to speak. It's an honor to be able to participate in this discussion today, and I appreciate that. So with that said, with the enactment of no excuse mail-in balloting, obviously our voter participation has increased, which is fantastic. That's the goal, is to be able to give many voters the opportunity to vote via at the polls or in the comfort of their home, as Senator Schwank said earlier. But this has also created many challenges and inconveniences to the election administrators. Not only does this affect our department as the election department, but it has now become an interdepartmental effort amongst all the departments in the county to be able to assist us. We basically are simultaneously running 2 elections on that day. One is in person that I actually manage that whole day on the floor in one building. And then our other building is our central scan operation that processes our mail-in ballots from pre-canvass all the way down to tabulation. So we have had some issues and constraints in the past with trying to get other departments to assist us. Obviously, they have other duties and responsibilities to the county. In November, it's a little bit easier because it's a holiday. So what the county did, and we just adopted for 2025, is that the primary day will now be a county holiday. That will allow us the opportunity to have more people available to be able to assist us, which is huge. But not all counties have that ability or the funds or the money to be able to do those kinds of things. So I think that's important to note that, we're able to do it as a larger county, but some others are not able to have that. But that is a huge benefit to us as far as being able to get people to assist us. due to the constraints with staffing and having the two operations, we're also split between two different locations, and that's due to the law, which states we have to count the ballots in the county seat, and our current building is not in the county seat. So we have half our operation downtown and half our operation in the, like, a mile or two away. So like to have that taken away out of the law, to be able to remove that would be super beneficial. We would be able to be in one building or find another building to build, because the county, the borough, as we know in Westchester, is pretty packed, and there's really not a lot of room for any more building. So that also poses a constraint to us as well. The Act 88 funding has been well needed and very much appreciated, and we like to utilize these funds not just to offset our current operational expenses, but we also like to use it to apply to make purchase new things and to keep things up to date and be able to improve and strengthen our processes with that money. So we thank you for continuing to be able to offer that as well. Our team is committed to evolving their expertise by participating in professional development. We go to tabletops with national groups and also local groups. We face challenges with election security. That's a big one this year that we've focused a lot on and provided a lot of extra training to our staff for that. And not only our staff, but our poll workers. We have invited CISA to come and give them a presentation for election security, and just to be mindful and aware of the things that are going on at the polls throughout the day. We collaborate with intergovernmental departments, intercounty collaboration via local, state, and federal partners, as well as the private sector. We do extensive research, training, and to constantly be able to improve our processes. With this law, when it was enacted, it doesn't come with standard operating procedures or a manual on how to do it. So we have to be very creative and come up with our own ideas. And we take ideas from other departments, from our vendors, from anyone across the board. We even have temps that have been working with us for the whole year, and they come and give us great ideas, which also helps. We're trying to instill trust through transparency with the public, and we offer them to come to our central scan. It's open to the public. We're one of the only counties that has that as an option. So we invite everyone to come see. We will walk them through anything. We will talk them through, and they are able to watch every process from start to finish on election day. We do really want to push the pre-canvassing. We're not allowed to start any pre-canvassing until 7 a.m. on election day, which then delays our results for the county. We would really push to remove that and be able to pre-canvass ballots sooner than 7 a.m. That way at 7 a.m. on election day, we're basically just tabulating ballots. They're already open. They've been checked for signature, for date, for all of those things. And then that allows us to be able to process in a more speedy manner. So those are the challenges that we face with the law, and we ask for some things to ease that burden from us through that law, and maybe just make some other changes going forward to be able to make things a little more easier for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your feedback, and hopefully you can stick around for the Q&A, because I think you guys are doing some great things. This always have, but certainly added some improvements that we want to chat about. So next we have our next testifier. We have James Allen. Thank you for joining us today, and from Delaware County Director of Elections, and we appreciate your participation. The floor is all yours.
Madam Chair and Senators, thank you for having me here today. I want to make clear that I come here as a nonpartisan election administrator who reports to a bipartisan Board of Election, and as well as a 400,000 group of voters who are Democrats, Republicans. I welcome the opportunity to be here, and I welcome any invitation I receive from your counterparts on the other side of the aisle. I'll try to keep my remarks brief. I think as we look at all of our options for voting, our options for registration, we just need to be mindful of one central thought, and that is that if we all have a common understanding that the act of voting, the act of running for office also, are extensions of our First Amendment rights under the U.S. Constitution, then from there, all other things flow. And I think there's a basis to build understanding on the need for in-person voting, on when we should allow for provisional ballots, how we should count those and whenever possible, how we should allow for mail and absentee voting, and lastly, how we should try to build trust among all of our stakeholders in doing things like perhaps starting pre-canvassing of ballots earlier than we are allowed to now. We're going to do everything we can in Delaware County to get through with higher speed scanners and with other procedural changes that we've made over the years to try to get through whatever mail and absentee balloting processing that we can as soon as possible, because we know that Pennsylvania is the center of attention at this upcoming election. It probably will be at future elections, but we know it for sure at this election. And we want to make sure that there's as much confidence and faith in the system that we're doing everything we can, because any kind of long delay undermines the public's belief and understanding. It's a weird business model when you think about it. We're in all 8,000 counties and in all 50 states. There's some common threads. One, whether people are in Texas, California, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania, the counting does not stop on Election Day. It appears to be pretty much sewn up in many of these states, and the margins are so large that the late arriving ballots, whether they're military overseas or the provisional ballots that are cast, those are still being counted 2 weeks after Election Day in all of these states, or at least for a few days in all of these states. And it just so happens that in 2000 in Florida, or in 2020 here in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, when the decision hangs in the balance and there are tight contests, the attention seems to be, wow, why is it taking so long? And it's taking that long, again, in all 50 states. It's just that the spotlight is going to be on us. But that being said, just as we offer second chances for our voters in the precinct polling place if they make a mistake on their ballot and they're allowed to spoil their ballot and get a new one, or we make sure that the scanners are set up so that if they overvote or completely undervote the page, let's say instead of filling in the ovals, they circle the candidates' names or underline the candidates' names. The paper ballot system that we have in Pennsylvania allows us to go back in a tight contest in a recount and determine the voter's intent in those situations. But in the polling place, that scanner is also going to kick out that voter and give them a chance to correct their errors or get a replacement ballot. Since we have that approach, it only makes sense that as election administrators, if we can and we have the ability and our Board of Elections wants us to, that we should be allowed to help our voters who aren't there on Election Day, the ones who have returned their mail and absentee ballots, especially a week before Election Day, 2 weeks before Election Day. We should be able to call them, email them, send them a letter, whatever means that we have. Let them know that they did not sign their envelope. They did not date their envelope. They did not use a secrecy envelope. This is a process called notice and cure, so that the voter has an opportunity, just as they would in the polling place, to correct the mistake and not lose their First Amendment right to speak. So with that, I welcome any questions you have. Again, thank you for being here, or thank you for having me here today, and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. That's a very excellent point about the in-person ability to correct errors. I mean, I've thought of it, but you've said it very eloquently, and I think that's been one of the points of contention the last several elections on what can be corrected, who is curing, if it's all counties or not. So I will start the Q&A off with Senator Cappelletti and then go to Senator Schwank. And I want to mention that Senator Lindsey Williams is also participating virtually. But go ahead, Senator Cappelletti.
Thank you both so much for your testimony. Mr. Allen, you hit the nail on the head. I was going to ask you explicitly about curing ballots for mail-in ballots because it sounded like you have such a strong belief in the First Amendment right and the connection to voting. But then you ended it with that, and I just thought that was really, really poignant because I know that that is an issue that is going to be coming up. Could you guys maybe talk about a little bit what we're doing ahead of time to try and address that with your ballots? I know you've talked, I read your testimony, you talked about some of the things that are being done to try and ensure people notice what they need to do and that it's clear and obvious what they have to do. And I was hoping maybe you could speak a little bit about what people can expect when they're getting a mail-in ballot this cycle.
Thank you, Senator. There's considerable debate about notice and cure in Pennsylvania as to whether everybody should be following the same script, following the same playbook in every single county. We don't seem to have that concern with our in-person voting because as election jurisdictions, within the limits of the law, we're going to experiment with color on the forms to try to get people to sign the right blanks on a provisional ballot envelope, for example, or we're going to have some people are going to use boldface to emphasize a point. Some people are going to have a remote site where they're going to collect because half of the county is on the other side of the mountain, and they're going to have another site where they collect. So similarly, with notice and cure, we're going to have different solutions that we're going to employ. So we're across the country, we're like 8,000 laboratories trying to find the best way forward within the law. So we looked at, for example, the success that Allegheny County had at the most recent primary. We liked what they were doing. We discussed it with our Board of Elections. We received bipartisan unanimous approval for this plan. We're going to do something that's an offshoot of what they do in Allegheny. When we get that envelope back, and we're required by law to process that in the SURE system. And just looking at the four corners of it, if it's plainly apparent that this voter is going to be disenfranchised based on that envelope, and based on their lack of signature, lack of date, lack of use of the secrecy envelope, we're going to cancel that, notify the voter, but also send out the replacement envelope and ballot right away. Problems do not get better with time. So if it becomes the 10th of October and it takes the voter, for whatever reason, 10 days to respond to our call, our email, our letter, or they don't get that letter, heaven forbid, problems don't get better with time. So it's better to send them a replacement ballot, cancel the original in the system, keep it sealed, keep it in our records, get them a new ballot with a letter with a checklist. Because just because they didn't sign the first time doesn't mean they won't date this time. So we're going to give them a checklist saying your first ballot cannot be counted. It's going to, the envelope, both the outbound and the return envelope, are going to be clearly marked with red ink, replacement, so that there isn't confusion, so there isn't, and they can call us and, why am I getting this replacement? We're going to have that right there and it's apparent. And also so that it's transparent for the authorized representatives of the campaigns who may be at our central count, so they can see, that, oh, this is a replacement envelope. It's not so that when we scan those envelopes later and they're requested under a right to know request, if they see a Betty Jones and another Betty Jones, they'll see the one Betty Jones is still sealed, was never opened. The ballot, any ballot inside there is still in there. The second one is a replacement. So that's what we're trying to do to make it as direct as possible to the voters. Like I said, problems don't get better with time, and we think the ability to notify and let the voter cure sooner rather than later is going to be tantamount. Now, when we get down to the last 4 days before Election Day, we're not going to be able to mail out. So I would encourage voters, I don't care what your political persuasion is, if you have your mind made up and you're certain that you're not going to change your mind before Election Day, get that ballot in sooner rather than later. Because if there is any kind of problem, you're giving your election jurisdiction more time to get a hold of you.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything, Ms. Kerr, that you would like to add?
Yeah, so in Chester County, we have a similar process where when the ballots come in, we do an internal review of checking the envelopes. If we do see some kind of possible discrepancy, we email the voters and also send them a letter in the mail notifying them. And then we give them the option to come to our satellite office here at the GSC building where their cured ballots are kept securely. They can come in, fix that deficiency on the ballot, and then hand it back to us. And then as we get closer to the elections, as Jim had stated, it makes it a little harder to notify them via email and mail. So we give our list to the parties and we let the parties make phone calls to those voters ahead of time as we get closer to the election to notify them of that process also.
Senator Schwank.
Thank you. Thank you both for your response, certainly your testimony and your responses. And one thing that's highlighted for me is certainly the biggest glaring omission, and it is not the county's fault, it's our fault as legislators, is that there is no consistency necessarily between counties on all aspects of the mail-in balloting or absentee ballot process. So what I want to focus on specifically is the mail-in, is the drop-off boxes and what your specific policies are. I'll note that the county that I represent, Berks, only has 3 drop-off boxes. And they are monitored by sheriff's deputies, 2 of them, and they are only open certain hours, of course, because of that, because they're in county facilities inside the buildings. And I hear from voters that this is difficult because just accessing that is not easy. And of course, the mail, folks know that oftentimes the mail just isn't as reliable as we'd like it to be. They tell us it is, but it's not necessarily the same everywhere again. Can you talk about your drop-off box policies, what you're doing? And I'll note again, every county can do this differently within the law. Maybe you could start, Krista.
Yeah, I'll start. So we have 13 drop boxes that go out to all of our libraries. They're all stationed outside, but during business hours of the library. And then we have 3 locations that are open till 8 p.m. to allow those voters who work to have those extra hours. And then also on Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 2. And they are staffed, each box is staffed by 2 Monarch staffers that we get from a temp agency. And they also have a camera on them. So it's 24/7 surveillance. Even when they're put away in the pod at night, that camera is still running with solar panels. Then we also have a security firm that we hired that drives around to each box daily to just keep an eye on the boxes, make sure everything's running smoothly, make sure there's no issues. And then at the end of the day, they put their body cameras on and they collect the ballots from us in a secure vehicle and bring them back to our office for processing after that. So there is a lot that goes into our Dropbox program. It is a very hefty program that we run. It's quite expensive with all the staffing and the security that we hire around it. But we want to be able to give everyone in the county, and Chester County is pretty large, so we kind of station them so they're in every, geographical location to allow that for them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Delaware County has easily the most extensive quantity of drop boxes. We have 38 currently. There's a reason for that. In 2020, before I arrived here, when the primary was delayed, rightly so, I might add, the drop-off point was the local municipality, the local polling places. It basically was a all-male primary. So flowing from there, they didn't want to be accused of picking winners and losers in communities, and so they offered it to all 49 municipalities 42 of them took them up on it. So we initially had 43 drop boxes. Since then, we've had a few where there were either camera issues or the local municipality decided they no longer wanted a drop box. So now it's at 38. I don't know, personally, I'm speaking on my personal opinion. This is not the opinion of the Board of Elections. I don't know what the sweet spot is. Philadelphia is moving up to something like 24 right now. I'm not personally convinced that we need 38, but at the same time, I know from one that we had to remove because there were camera issues there, the sensitivity about removing one now, right ahead of a presidential election, is high. So, so we're going to be examining what the right number is. We have 24-hour, 7 days a week cameras on those. We have our park police monitoring those cameras. How do I know they're monitoring it? Because they also have my cell phone and they call me at 10 p.m., 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., anytime a camera goes down. And then we have to try to reboot the camera and or shut down that drop box. So we're looking at expanding. We're trying to figure out with the system that was built on the fly in 2020, whether or not we're going to be able to live stream that. Those 38 cameras, but right now those are open 24 hours, 7 days a week. In 4 years since the 2020 election, I've heard a number of things. I arrived here in 2021, but I've not seen any kind of evidence of what has been claimed about abuse of drop boxes. I would remind the public of two things. There are hundreds of U.S. Postal Service blue boxes out there that are not under any kind of surveillance, and we seem to have implicit faith in those. And on the other hand, drop boxes, despite all of the criticisms that we hear, if you are a believer in chain of custody, the chain of custody couldn't be more direct, going from the voter to the election authority. You don't have the Postal Service, which most of the time is reliable. However, if you're an election administrator, I don't care if you're in Lackawanna or Delaware County or Philadelphia, you have seen envelopes that were postmarked before Election Day that arrive 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 months after Election Day. That does not happen with county drop boxes. So again, I don't know what the sweet spot is in terms of the numbers per population, and that could be hashed out by the lawmakers, I'm sure, along with all the other provisions of laws that date to 1937, perhaps, if I can nudge you on that front. But I want to emphasize that at the very least, if there's restrictions on drop boxes, we be allowed to make sure that they're available, especially in those last 4 or 5 days before Election Day. If people are taking their time, making up their mind, and they only deposit on Election Day, they can't be relying on the U.S. Postal Service as good as they do, as good a job as they do. So that's where we are.
You each brought out so many critical points in how that system works. And a couple things that I'm hearing you, or that I understand is happening as a result of this. A lot of this depends upon the political leadership, right? Your election board, who I would assume are currently your county commissioners, but also, what their thoughts are on what this process should look like. And then we need to be thinking about what the public, that chain of custody that both of you spoke about, that is so critically important in making sure that people feel that their vote is secure and that it will be going directly to be counted. So there's so much we need to do to bring some clarity to this process. You both brought that out for me, and I appreciate that. I hope sooner rather than later. I can't believe it's already another presidential election. Talked about 2020. Here we are in 2024. We're still operating much of the same rules, and that's real. It's not acceptable. I have to be critical of us. And hopeful that we're going to be able to get this fixed sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schwank. And I would just add, I think it's different. I think there needs to be flexibility in to the points you all both made about the number of drop boxes based on county size, public transportation, where populate, but to have minimal seems very restrictive. And that sweet spot might just have to have some criteria, right? Like these are within so many miles of where, residents live or something like that, because Delaware County, Chester County, even Delaware to Chester County might have, geographic differences relative to public transportation and other things.
In my off time, I enjoy umpiring baseball. So I like rules. I like there to be consistent guidance. I like the rules not to change in the middle of a game, because you need that consistency. So now that we're already into the process of doing logic and accuracy tests, I'm hopeful that there aren't any court decisions that reverse things dramatically in any direction. That we go through this election with as much stability as possible.
100% agree, and that was a great analogy. So thank you. Do you have any other questions?
No, Senator Schwank hit the other questions I was going to ask about. So thank you both so much. This was truly informative.
Yes, thank you both. We appreciate, and we will obviously post everyone's election office website as in the press release that goes out after this. So if people read and have a question about their ballot, they know where to go. If they don't know, especially people if they just moved into the state, might not have been here in 2020 and to be able to vote. So we appreciate your insight, and also being able to have the self-awareness to look at what did and didn't work after each election and what needs improved, because not looking back on how things went and continuing to go forward, as you said very eloquently, problems don't get better with time, they get better with solutions. So I think that's another part is, as things change or security needs change, just being able to self-reflect by county, what are the things that we need to enhance, in terms of security or just process, staffing, those types of things. Do you have something to add?
No, thank you. Thank you again for having us here today, and thank you for your efforts. I hope that there can be bipartisan movement in the coming years to address the areas where we have some common ground or where we can reach some compromise.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krista, and we concur. We all represent Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, unaffiliated, and I can speak for our caucus that we all certainly want everyone to have access to vote, even if they're not voting for us. It's still an important part of democracy and needs to be upheld. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you on those much needed changes to our election laws. Thank you. Good luck with 60 Minutes, Krista.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you very much, Mr. Allen, for
Bye.
joining us. We'll switch over, seat switch to panel number 2 here. And so, as mentioned by our testifiers, our laws, even though recently updated, still lack the necessary details and certain details and direction that would help streamline a lot of what we're discussing today. And so our panel number 2 is specific to discussing policy solutions, things that could be helpful, in terms of updating the laws around how we vote, security, and other issues, so that they're more applicable across all counties and consistent and transparent. So I want to say thank you to both of our testifiers for being with us here today. We have Philip Hensley Robin, who's the Executive Director of Common Cause, and we also have Lauren Christella from Committee of 70, who's virtual, and we also have Jeff Reber, who is from the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania election, from CCAP's board for the Election Reform Committee Chair, and you are also a Union County Commissioner. So thank you so much, all 3 of you, for joining us today. And we'll kick it off. Philip, the floor is all yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Muth, Senator Cappelletti, and Senator Schwank for the opportunity to present my testimony this morning. My name is Philip Hensley Robin, and I am the Executive Director of Common Cause Pennsylvania. We are a nonpartisan voting rights and democracy reform organization and have been dedicated to making government more accountable to we the people since 1970. We have over 35,000 members and supporters in every county of this Commonwealth. As we've already heard this morning, mail-in voting is a secure and convenient way for voters to cast their ballots. Since the 2020 election, millions of Pennsylvania voters have voted by mail. No excuse mail-in voting, introduced in 2020 with Act 77, was not only a literal lifesaver at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has also made voting much more accessible for voters, for example, those with mobility issues. While the adoption of no excuse mail-in voting in Pennsylvania was a meaningful step forward, there are many areas for improvement in Pennsylvania's mail-in ballot policies. Today, I would like to discuss the rules which result in thousands of eligible voters' mail-in ballots being disqualified and discuss some policy solutions. Under Pennsylvania law and relevant precedent, mail-in ballots are disqualified if they have any one of several defects. Ballots are disqualified if the voter's declaration is incomplete, missing a signature or date, or is dated inaccurately. Ballots are also disqualified if a secrecy envelope is missing. They are also disqualified if ballots are received after 8 p.m. on Election Day. In the 2024 April primary, nearly 16,000 ballots from otherwise eligible voters were disqualified for one of these reasons. This disenfranchisement is particularly concerning because the impact of these rules is not felt equally. Research has shown that Black voters, Latino voters, and elderly voters are disproportionately impacted by signature and date rejection rules. The ballot receipt deadline, by contrast, disproportionately impacts young voters. Common Cause Pennsylvania believes that no eligible voter should be disqualified for making a simple mistake. We all make mistakes. We forget our keys. We misplace our phones. We write the wrong date on a check, those of us who still write checks. These mistakes happen all the time. They should not be grounds for disenfranchising tens of thousands of our fellow Pennsylvanians. Legislation is desperately needed to clarify that a missing secrecy envelope or improperly dated declaration are not grounds for rejecting a ballot. We also recommend that state law should be changed so that mail ballots received within 7 days of an election, but which are postmarked by Election Day, are not disqualified. I believe 19 states, ranging from New Jersey to West Virginia to Mississippi to Utah, allow ballots received after the deadline to some degree to be counted, whether it's 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 14 days. So Pennsylvania adopting that change would be well in line with the practice of many fellow states. Ballot disqualification, however, is not the only issue the legislature should address. The Senate should take up legislation already passed in the House to permit pre-canvassing of mail-in ballots, as we've already heard this morning. Pre-canvassing alleviates administrative burdens on our county election officials, and it also can provide voters with earlier notice of a potential mail ballot defect, and therefore an opportunity to cure that defect. The legislature should also enact mail-in voting policies that favor voters and are uniform across the Commonwealth. Senator Schwank has already spoken to the huge range of diversity that we've seen in county election policies as a result of some of the absences in state election law. Currently, counties vary considerably in the availability of secure ballot drop boxes, and some counties offer satellite election offices where voters may make in-person mail-in ballot requests at a location apart from the main elections office, but many counties do not offer such opportunities to their voters. While many counties have notice and cure policies in place, not all do, and not all communicate with voters in the same way. Pennsylvania voters and election administrators desperately need clarity and uniformity on these questions, given, of course, that there will be leeway for some larger counties to have more ballot drop boxes and some to have fewer. We believe that the legislature should act and guarantee that voters in every county have access to at least a few drop boxes in every county, and the legislature should require notice and cure programs in every county, giving counties the leeway to adapt those programs to the needs of their voters, so that regardless of where a voter lives in Pennsylvania, they will be notified of any defect with their mail-in ballot. In the absence of legislative action or changes arising from state or federal court decisions, counties can and should implement some of these pro-voter mail-in policies themselves. So most importantly, counties should enact robust notice and cure policies. Allowing voters to cure ballots can significantly reduce a county's mail ballot rejection rate. In 2023, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court affirmed counties' ability to adopt notice and cure policies. We know many counties have taken these steps. Common Cause Pennsylvania, alongside our partners in the Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition, recommend a number of best practices that counties adopt in their notice and cure programs. We recommend that when a voter returns their mail ballot in person to the county election office, the Board of Elections should train election workers to review the outer envelope for the presence of the signature and date and determine whether a secrecy envelope is included before accepting that ballot. In addition, we strongly encourage counties to enter the appropriate codes into the SURE system immediately upon receipt of a ballot and to immediately notify voters of disqualifying defects. Counties should also include the specific reason for the rejection by associating the correct code in the SURE system that corresponds to the defect, and update information in the SURE system if the voter does cure their ballot. When ballot defects are identified, counties should attempt to reach voters via email, text, phone call, or, as a last resort, mail. Counties should publicly release a list of voters whose ballots will not be counted and provide the list to political parties, candidates, and voter education organizations, such as ourselves, who request them, so that those groups can share the burden of notifying voters. Counties should also designate dates and times outside of regular business hours for voters to cure their ballots, including weekend and evening hours for at least 2 weeks before Election Day. If the signature or date is missing or incorrect, the voter should be advised of and given an option to visit an election office to provide a signature, request the original ballot be canceled and a replacement ballot be reissued, or if the voter have a disability, allow the voter to designate an agent to receive and deliver the replacement ballot. And voters should also be given the opportunity to vote by provisional ballot on Election Day to cure a defect in their previously submitted mail ballots. Counties must count those provisional ballots if the voter's registration and eligibility are verified. If the secrecy envelope is missing, we also have recommendations for counties that ballots should be canceled immediately and that voters should be given the option to request a replacement mail ballot or vote by provisional ballot on Election Day. Counties must count those provisional ballots if the voter's registration and eligibility are verified. In conclusion, Pennsylvania counties and the General Assembly have an obligation to act to ensure that all eligible voters will have their votes counted. When the right to vote is abridged, citizens' voices are silenced and elections are not truly free and equal as guaranteed by the Pennsylvania Constitution. The legislature can and must clarify that minor errors are not grounds for disqualification and enact pre-canvassing and uniform pro-voter policies, including drop boxes and notice and cure opportunities in every county. But if the legislature does not act, we call on county boards of elections to enact pro-voter policies in their own counties, in particular, those robust notice and cure policies that have a proven track record of preventing mail ballots from being disqualified. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. And we'll go to Lauren now, who is the President and CEO of Committee of 70. She's virtual. Thank you for joining us, Lauren. The floor is all yours.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to testify today before your committee. I'm Lauren Christella, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. For more than 120 years, the Committee of 70 has sought to make government more transparent and accountable and to help everyday citizens understand and engage with their government. We were founded in Philadelphia to combat corruption and have played an important role in civil service reform, campaign finance reform, and election administration. We're a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization, and we do not endorse candidates or represent any special interests. We want better government that our citizens can trust. Election administration in Pennsylvania has transformed dramatically in recent years. Act 77 of 2019 was a historic and bipartisan reform package, achieving the greatest set of changes to the state election code since 1937. But as this deal was negotiated, no one could have foreseen how a global pandemic would exponentially increase the impact of the new law and the use of mail-in ballots. While Act 77 is an important step toward making voting more accessible, numerous reports, studies, and calls issued by lawmakers, local and state officials, and advocacy groups highlight that additional reform is absolutely needed. With another presidential election approaching, I'm making one more urgent call to address the unfinished business from that law. Pennsylvania's election laws are outdated, and many parts need to be updated to reflect modern voting needs. While lawmakers from both parties have proposed solid ideas, the only change that can realistically happen before the 2024 elections is allowing pre-canvassing. Other updates would be too disruptive and costly for counties to manage on such short notice. That said, several issues demonstrate the need for legislative action, regardless of timing, and are worth noting now and addressing in the near future. A perfect example of this is the requirement to hand date the outside envelopes of mail-in ballots. In establishing the mail-in ballot option, Act 77 of 2019 copied much of the pre-existing law for absentee ballots, including language regarding the use of privacy envelopes and a requirement that voters handwrite a date on the ballot return envelope. This language previously created no significant problems given the limited use of absentee ballots and the common practice in many counties to process ballots regardless of a handwritten date because it is inconsequential to ballot integrity. Prior to 2019, the use of secrecy envelopes made sense as the limited number of ballots being processed could allow for a voter's selections to be made public more easily. Today, however, absentee and mail-in ballots in every county are canvassed in a central office. In larger counties, the privacy of a voter's ballot selections is guaranteed by the large volume of ballots being processed, typically with machines that are separating thousands of ballots from their envelopes. But even in the smallest counties, basic protocols can ensure the protection of a voter's selections, even when processing is conducted by hand. With regard to handwritten dates on ballot return envelopes, this was never a critical requirement for ballot integrity or election administration. Every such envelope has the voter's information and a unique barcode, ensuring that election officials know when a ballot was sent out and when it was received. These dates are recorded in the statewide voter registration system, creating an auditable trail. These dates are recorded. Current law only allows ballots received by 8 p.m. on election day to be counted. There continues to be no reason for ballots to be rejected because the voter did not write the date on the return envelope. Pennsylvanians and election administrators across the Commonwealth have, for years now, been forced to rely on judicial interpretation of this requirement, while courts on the state and federal levels have sought to balance the legislative language against voting rights and the language of the United States and Commonwealth constitutions. The back and forth nature of decisions has caused confusion that could easily be solved by legislative action that would ensure Pennsylvanians, particularly older citizens who have proven to be about 30% more likely to struggle with this requirement, do not needlessly have their votes canceled. This is just one example of the need for you and your colleagues to work together across the aisle to ensure that our elections remain safe, secure, and accurate, and that individuals are not disenfranchised over technicalities that serve no purpose in ensuring elections are secure. Pennsylvania's 67 counties are responsible for running elections that vary greatly in size. The largest counties employ scores of personnel with multi-million-dollar budgets, while the smallest execute their elections with a handful of dedicated staff. However, every county has been subject to tremendous stress, most of which stems from restrictions and ambiguities in the state law. Reform that leads to increased efficiency and lower strain on county election officials and workers is essential. In addition to the issues detailed above, legislative action to clarify other processes such as ballot curing and the use of drop boxes would limit the strain on election administrators who have been forced since 2019 to interpret complex legal decisions. Thousands of registered Pennsylvania voters continue to encounter unnecessary obstacles every election, in large part due to problematic provisions of the election code. Some of these predate Act 77, but the expansion of mail-in voting without appropriate election code adjustments has exacerbated risks to some voters successfully casting a ballot. In some cases, the revision of current law with just a few words will prevent a large number of registered voters from having legitimate ballots rejected. It's important to note that despite inaction on these challenges, intense partisanship, widespread mis- and disinformation, attempts at foreign interference, and a torrent of litigation in recent years, our elections are still secure and results should be trusted. But liabilities do exist due to poorly written laws, and these should be resolved as soon as possible. While we're not suggesting legislative action before the presidential election beyond legalizing ballot pre-canvassing, there is still an urgent need for reform, and this work to improve these processes should begin now. In particular, the legislature, working in conjunction with county election administrators, should prioritize the following reforms following November's general election. First, you can strengthen faith in elections through pre-canvassing. Pre-canvassing, commonly referred to as ballot pre-processing in other states, consists of examining envelopes containing returned ballots to determine whether they can be processed, removing and flattening the ballots, and scanning the ballots to record votes. Critically, this process should not include counting or tabulating the votes, a step that can be taken after polls close and when unofficial results are released to the public. Local officials from both parties have been clear about the value in providing additional time before Election Day to begin the work of inspecting ballot return envelopes, extracting the ballots within, and scanning those ballots to record the votes. County should be allowed to begin the processing of absentee and mail-in ballots up to 7 days before Election Day. This processing can reasonably include the inspection and opening of return envelopes and the extraction and scanning of ballots. A prohibition should stay in place on the tabulation and release of any election results until 8 p.m. on Election Day. Bipartisan observation of the process is important to maintain trust and ensure compliance with the law. As is currently allowed, one authorized representative of each candidate and political party should be present when ballots are being processed, with attorneys authorized by the campaigns allowed to observe ballot processing in any county. Training of these observers by local and state officials could potentially be provided to aid them in their roles. County boards of election should also be authorized to expel such representatives and watchers who are disruptive or who are interfering with the administration of the election. I thank you for this time and for the opportunity. And once again, we implore you to take these important steps in securing our elections.
Thank you very much. And we have one last testifier for this panel. So we have Jeff, who's from CCAP. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Reber, and I am chair of the CCAP Elections Reform Policy Committee, as well as vice chair of the Union County Board of Commissioners. I represent the CCAP Elections Reform and CCAP itself today, however. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to discuss absentee and mail-in ballot access in Pennsylvania. We know it's crucial for our 67 counties to ensure that elections remain fair, secure, and accessible at every step. Counties are responsible for implementing significant changes to the election code, particularly with the introduction of mail-in ballots under Act 77 of 2019. As you've heard from previous testifiers, not all of those changes have gone smoothly. And in light of the 2020 election, CCAP's Election Reform Committee reviewed county experiences and issued a report with recommendations in January of 2021. And these have guided our collaboration with the General Assembly to refine the election code. And we certainly appreciate the interactions we've had in the past few years. We, however, still have several recommendations to improve election administration and the overall voter experience. Counties seek clarification on several issues to streamline processes, authority for the use of drop boxes for ballots following previous litigation, protocols for handling naked ballots and allowing voters to cure defects, guidelines for provisional ballots for voters with defective submissions, and procedures for undated and misdated ballots. The current lack of clarity leads to lawsuits and misinformation about our election processes, and we must collaborate with the legislature to craft clear legislative language to avoid future challenges, because those of us at the county level, we're the boots on the ground for the administration, and that's why it's critical to have a seat along with the Department of State. In addition to the aforementioned clarifications, county selected 2 election-related reforms as part of our 2024 county priorities. Counties have been advocating consistently for these 2 mail-in voting reforms for the last several years, and we urge the legislature to consider these 2 key changes. First, allowing counties to pre-canvass received mail-in ballots at least 5 days before Election Day, and moving mail-in ballot application deadline to 15 days before the election. Pre-canvassing will enable counties to focus on in-person operations on Election Day, especially during high turnout events like presidential elections. And adjusting the application deadline ensures voters have ample time to receive and return their ballots, enhancing their voter experience and maintaining accurate poll books. There are financial considerations, however, also that come along with all the changes. And changes to Act 77 significantly increased election-related costs for counties because it effectively created a second election, as you've heard from several others today. And reports indicate that some of these costs may have doubled in certain counties with no ongoing state support to alleviate the burden on property taxpayers. Now, while the Election Integrity Grant program authorized under Act 88 of 2022 was a positive step, it does not fully address all the funding needs. So as we approach the fiscal year 25-26 budget cycle, we urge Governor Shapiro and the legislature to increase the $45 million line item to align funding with rising election administrative costs. So as you consider the changes to the election code, it is vital that any substantial changes are enacted well in advance of elections to ensure proper implementation. And counties stand ready to collaborate with the legislature and administration to address these challenges and improve election processes. So thank you for allowing me to share these insights. I look forward to working together with the legislative changes that enhance election administration in Pennsylvania. And I'm happy to answer any further questions you may have.
Yeah, I'll start with Senator Cappelletti.
Thank you all so much for the information that you're giving us today. Mr. Reber, is it?
Yes.
I actually have a direct question for you, with a follow-up question for everybody, but I happened to be on PCN yesterday with my counterpart in state government, majority chair, and that is the committee, for those of you who don't know, where the elections laws go through that committee. So we were on PCN discussing election laws. And I brought up how important pre-canvassing is, how our counties are really, stressing that this is what they want. He seemed to push back and have this idea that CCAP doesn't actually represent the majority of the counties and wanting pre-canvassing. And I'm just wondering, since you're with CCAP, if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you come to this place of priority issues and the support that has really the counties have really put behind pre-canvassing.
Thank you for the question, Senator Cappelletti. I'm not sure where the pushback came from, because my involvement over the years with CCAP has always been that we represent all 67 counties. And when our priorities are voted on, it's actually voted on by the majority of the members who are present at our fall conference, or I'm sorry, our summer conference. And that's also has a virtual option to it. So even if you can't attend, you don't have to be in person to vote for that. So I'm not quite sure where that pushback came from, because pre-canvassing is something that ever since 2020 happened and counties started to learn a little bit about what the issues were. In fact, actually, we started out at 15 days because we wanted additional time, because we were kind of concerned how things are working, right? But over the years, we've experienced that we can be more efficient. Many of us have gone out and purchased pieces of equipment, or have learned how to better utilize others in our county government to help on election day itself. So we still see the need, especially for larger counties who have just tens of thousands of ballots to count, in order to get them counted and the election results processed that same day. As you heard from the last panel, we need to get the results out the day of the election, or people start to question the election a little bit. And the spotlight is certainly going to be on Pennsylvania here this fall. We don't want that to happen again. But from the CCAP perspective, we have always been in favor of pre-canvassing. Like I said, we've adjusted our own mindset, however, given the fact that we've learned some things and realized that 5 days would be the ideal minimum. Want to give us a few extra days, we'd certainly appreciate that as well. But any sort of adjustment there is going to help not only give credence to many people's thoughts about the election results, but it's going to help the administration at the counties as well. And one of the things we don't want to see is the turnover in election officials again. After 2020, we lost a lot, right? We had a lot of turnover. In the last 2 years, we've seen more people stick around again, which is very nice. But I think part of that is the fact that we've come accustomed to what we need to do, and that people are becoming a little more less concerned, we'll say, about the pushback in some areas. But we are under a constant microscope, and the more time you can give us, the better.
And for context sake, because I think public watching, you probably all know this in this room, but I think it's an important note, is that, Senator Cappelletti is the minority chair of the State Government Committee, just as I am the minority chair of the Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee, and the Senate rules that are passed by a majority number of senators, just like you mentioned, a majority voted to support pre-canvassing of all the counties, right? Enough people voted to say, we support that. The rules are passed by typically the majority party, but that we don't get to run, even though we're the chairs of these Senate official committees, we do not get to determine agendas, hearings, what bills come up for a vote. So part of the existence of this policy committee isn't because we're like uber partisan, like Democratic policy committee. It's that we have to have a platform to try to insert either a bill that one of our members has or an issue. And this is the premise of that, because a lot of the state government committee hearings and meetings are very skewed, and there's no collective effort between two chairs and that happens on a lot of committees. Some have better relationships, but this is why we're here to hear this, because I think it's a fair statement to say, no matter if your county is Republican-led commissioner board or Democrat, is that, you want staff to have efficient processes. And to your point, staff is under, it's stressful hearing all these questions about election integrity, safety, and then the safety piece. Like, do you want to stay in this job where you feel like there's this angry, crew of people that are saying, and you're working overtime, right, to try to do all these things. Like, you're like, we're doing the work and getting a lot of blowback. And so I think having the ability, I don't know that the general public knows what goes behind pre-canvassing, but my husband, for Senator Cappelletti's primary election, was one of the poll watchers at the counting place, and he's like, my God, it is just like opening envelope after envelope. No, people don't really know the tedious amount of effort and time. And yes, there's equipment, envelope openers, which are expensive. So to expect counties to foot that bill, building in that buffer for pre-canvassing is the most cost-efficient way to allow for ballots to be counted, scanned, and tabulated in a more timely manner, because I don't know that everyone understands, like, take the partisan, whether you support mail-in voting or not, out of it. It's just the process of it is staff intensive. Even if you're a smaller county, you still have to open envelopes. I don't know how long it takes to open the 2 envelope and do all that, but it's a lot of work, and you want it to be organized. So I think it doesn't surprise me that CCAP supports the idea of pre-canvassing, and that it's just common sense process-wise. It has nothing to do with politics. It's just process efficiency. I had to put that plug in. Go ahead, Senator Cappelletti.
I appreciate that. I do want to note, though, I do have a fairly good relationship, although we have very differing views on certain issues, a fairly good relationship with my counterpart, the majority chair of the state government committee. And we do try to find different ways to work together. However, I think this is an issue that we have some disagreement on. Because to go back to that PCN interview that we did, he also brought up this idea that the county commissioners seem to like, that he brought to them at a meeting that he spoke at, about mail-in ballots being counted in their precincts. And this is for any of you to be able to speak to. Thoughts around these and the impact that would have on your election workers, the efficacy of getting this done in a timely manner, whether it's chain of custody questions. Just, can you speak to, is that something our election workers, anybody sees as a good process, something that would be helpful to count them at our precincts on election day?
I'm going with Lauren first, because she has a Katie Muth facial expression where she's like nodding and giving her answer beforehand. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hiding my faces is the challenge of my life. We are against that proposal. I think from a chain of custody perspective, from what we're already asking the workers to do in each of the precincts, and the time it would take, we're just fully against that. And I haven't found an election director who's supportive of that to date. So I don't know if anybody else has heard specific feedback on that front, but Committee of 70 is firmly opposed.
Yeah, CCAP is not in favor of such a proposal either. Like you said, it's going to put additional stress and responsibilities on our poll workers already. Plus, it's organizationally, it's a challenge. Quite frankly, chain of custody, we can accomplish the chain of custody part of that. That's not the issue, I don't think, in my mind. But it just adds complexity. And again, we are getting those ballots back after 8 p.m. on election day then, so it's just going to postpone the actual counting process as well.
I agree. To your question of, has this something that we've heard from county election officials or anyone? It's not something that we're hearing a cry out for. And I think having been a poll worker myself, the training and the work required, it's a long day. It's something that is demanding, and so many people, give of their time and come out for their community, and they work together in these bipartisan teams to make sure our elections are run efficiently and fairly and freely. And we don't need to add an additional unnecessary component to a long and stressful day when we have processes in place to count those ballots effectively and efficiently already.
I'd also like to add that with the investment that was made through Act 88, there's tons of processing equipment, and we should further invest in that infrastructure, not defund it, basically.
Thank you all so much for that. It just certainly gives clarity to that policy point and what would where that's coming from and what's happening there. I will ask one last question, again, for all of you. We've heard a lot for some policy changes, and we know that doing, aside from pre-canvassing, anything else that we do right now would really throw an election into chaos. So that's not good timing. What does good timing look like or mean to you when we are making changes to the election laws, because we do have elections every spring and every fall?
I think that work should begin immediately for the primary. If we can enact laws at least 90 days in advance, that should give notice, but obviously sooner the better. So anything that we can get moving on this fall that would go into effect for the spring primary would be an ideal timing from my perspective.
I agree. I think at least 90 days. I may differ with some of my fellow panelists here in the sense that as plaintiffs in some of the lawsuits that are pending, Common Cause Pennsylvania does believe that, for example, disqualifying ballots for undated electors outer envelope is something that should be changed, and we would honestly would welcome a court decision doing that before this November's election. Understand that that may add some complication or change some standard operating procedures for some counties, but it's of utmost importance that eligible voters get their ballots counted. And anything that we can do between now and Election Day, I understand the legislature is not going to act on that, but acting after this election before the primary with a 90-day lead is something we would strongly support.
I really appreciate that question, because if you remember in 2020, that was part of the problem. I mean, it was on Election Day. We were still getting direction from the Department of State or the state Supreme Court, et cetera, as to how we're going to handle ballots on the day of the election, which did not add to the confidence level of that election. We'll put it that way. So when you look at doing changes, we don't have to do wholesale changes right away, though, either. Okay, we can walk a little bit and take step by step. County Commissioners Association is fine with that. They said we do have some of our priorities, and you've heard some others from others here as well that I think we can address in a more timely manner. But some of the bigger changes perhaps, may take a little more time. And so you could put a start date on, it doesn't have to be the day you pass it. It could say effective, the next general or the next whatever, whether it's 90 days, 180 days out, whatever. But we're looking to fix this ship and write it in the long term. Okay, and if we can do a little part here and a little part there, we're fine with that, and we're really willing to work with you on how to make that happen. Like I said, from those of us who actually administer the election, we may have a different viewpoint than some who are more from the voter side of things, because we are not a get out the vote organization, right? We are not involved with that in any way, shape, or form. We're very nonpartisan. We administer the election, so our viewpoint is probably a little bit different maybe on some of these things, but I think as a group we can collaborate here and make sure that it gets fixed for everyone.
And I think my follow-up to that would be I'm going to ask you a question about just briefly recapping the existing court things, because I think it's important to let the public know as they continue reading headlines about these decisions that they're not confused about what is happening at a very somewhat rapid pace ahead of a big election. Is this change? Is this still the law? Can I do this? Can I, but in terms of the timing piece, is it obviously when it's human power related, the more notice counties can get, the better, right? Like if you're going to have to staff up because something in the law changed, that's something. But would you agree that, some of these court decisions or even fixes that are needed, once they're uniform, it does alleviate the stress across the 67, the unknown, or how do we do this? This county's doing this. We're not. At least it's just leveling that playing field of everyone must fill in the blank, have X amount of drop boxes, or have access to drop boxes at this many hours, or some sort of defined thing. Would CCAP view those types of changes, helpful?
The uniformity is really what our end game is, quite frankly, because that's what that's what we want. We don't want things to go to the court system. We don't want the Department of State to have to come down and make mandates the day of the election, the day before the election, whatever. We just want some uniformity, and I hear that from colleagues across the aisle and across the state. Okay, we will follow the law. Tell us what the law is, and take the ambiguity out of it. Because, even within our own county board of elections, we don't always agree on how we interpret the law. We have a solicitor to help us with that. But even amongst, the 67 counties, okay, in the state of Pennsylvania, I'm sure you always heard, if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. That should not be the way it is in elections, okay? We should have one uniform way of handling elections that really takes out all the ambiguity. And honestly, everybody I talk to from the election administration side would be thrilled if that were the case.
And I'm just thinking of a situation where Senator Cappelletti called me about your brother, and I represent parts of 3 counties. Therefore, I have 3 county election boards, and for Berks County, and he was being deployed, and I'm like, let me go find out, because each of my 3 counties do this differently. So I didn't want to be inaccurate and tell her the wrong thing, and that's important that we can point to any county and say that's the process, right? That there's no go look this up on 67 websites, trying to figure out what's happening. So anyone can chime in here, but can we just recap what is pending in court, if you're able to, just from these headline things, because even my own dad will send me something like, is this what's happening? Is this changed, especially this close to an election day, in terms of what we could expect and just be aware of?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I would just like to add briefly to the discussion that was just being had that uniformity is essential. It's really important for election administrators, and it's really helpful for voters. If we're educating voters about what are the rules, what do I do when I vote by mail? What can I do in terms of a satellite elections office for an over-the-counter request of a mail-in ballot? If these things vary in all 67 counties, voters can't follow that. They don't know what's available to them. And it's really important, both for avoiding litigation, which we think would be a good thing, and for the voter experience, if the experience was uniform across counties. You shouldn't have fewer opportunities to have your vote count just because you're in a different county. To the question about the state of the law, so what everyone should know is, under current law, a ballot will be disqualified if the date is missing or inaccurate. Litigation that we were party to, namely BPEP versus Schmidt, had a decision in the Commonwealth Court ruling in our favor, saying that those ballots should be counted. Most recently, there was a Supreme Court of Pennsylvania decision, which on procedural grounds threw out that Commonwealth Court decision. So that's the current state of the law here in Pennsylvania. And so I think it's very important for all voters to know. Sign and date the declaration on the outside of your envelope. The date is the date that you're completing your ballot and mailing it.
And not your birth date.
And not your birth date, not the date of the election.
There's also a case where the GOP has sought a King's Bench decision around notice and cure practices that we're keeping a close eye on as well.
And will you explain for the public that doesn't know, the non-lawyer public, what a King's Bench decision is, so they understand?
So just a direct appeal straight to the Supreme Court. So it's not going to work its way through the other levels of government. So a quicker decision, but without the vetting, process that goes through the other levels of the judiciary. And this is to basically say that no one can. They're seeking to have like all notice and cure eliminated, basically.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that's an important point to note, that that's happening right now. I hope our judicial system upholds democracy as it should, but we will wait to hear the news on that. And then I have a question from Senator Schwank, who had to jump off because the governor's visiting her district, so she had to go to that event. So she wanted to know, in terms of can you point to a state another state in the country that that has mail-in ballot best practices, or one that you could say, this would really help Pennsylvania, it's proven to work, or some such example to point to?
I just want to vote like Florida. They allow for pre-canvassing. I mean, there's a ton of states that do, but I think pointing to Florida in particular for how much time, I think it's weeks in advance of election day that they're able to start pre-canvassing those ballots.
You want to vote like Florida, but maybe not live there. No, that's just my opinion. Any other thoughts?
I think there are many things in Florida election law that, yeah, we could copy. I think, Colorado is also a state that I would look to for well-run elections, and that has uniformity across the state with options to vote in person, but many people choose to vote by mail. And then there are, 8 states that choose to do all mail elections. I don't think that's what the direction Pennsylvania is going to go, but I think it is a proof of concept and also shows that all mail elections can be run securely. You might get some of your results a little bit later, and I know that that's something that people care about, but from Common Cause Pennsylvania's perspective, it's important everyone knows that, at least in Pennsylvania, at least this year, election night is not results night, and the checks and balances and the procedures that we have in place to make sure our election is safe and secure they're in place for a reason, and we can have confidence in the results when they come out, as they come out.
I don't know enough about other states' election processes to really give you an expert answer on that.
No, it's always good to ask and to hear thoughts, and I think that's an interesting eight states that do the all mail-in and have secure and safe elections. My brother used to live in one of them, and my husband just texted me and said he's from Florida. Remember, as I said, no one should want to live there. So, but I will turn it over. Do you have any other questions?
No, I think I'm good.
Well, we will be watching the headlines for court decisions, and appreciate that you're all so thorough and helpful in describing, from your perspective, the needed changes and also what is in place this year that we should expect. And I think the election night is not results night is a great thing to keep repeating. I as someone was in Senator Cappelletti and Senator Schwank certainly can speak to this year, is that yes, we want to know our results quickly to see if we still have employment, but we also would like them to be counted correctly. So I think that's a fair thing. And while the pain and the agony of waiting can be intense, that we know that things are done correctly, and we appreciate all of your efforts to try to streamline that, to try to make it better, despite the gaps in the laws. And I can say for this committee, we'll work hard to try to close some of those gaps. So I'll give it to you for closing remarks. And thank you all for participating today.
Thank you, Chairwoman Muth. Thank you to all of the testifiers who made time in their day today to participate, whether you drove out to Harrisburg or you're doing it virtually. We truly appreciate that you are willing to come be the experts at our table and let us know what we can be doing better and help us more fully think about what's going on and how to improve right now our election processes. I want to thank the policy committee and my staff as well, and Senator Schwank's staff for all of the hard work that they put in to help prepare for this event, and then as well to my co-hosts, Chairwoman Muth and Senator Schwank, for today's discussion. It was really enlightening to see how nonpartisan this is, how important and it is for so many people all across the Commonwealth, and to help get that information out there on what's really going on and what people are thinking about. Because what Pennsylvanians should know is, as we're talking about how to improve these processes, we still have the election going on right now. So this is another one of those things we're finding hiccups in the system as we go, and we need to work to correct those, but it's like building the plane as you're flying it. So you need to remember October 21st is the last day to register to vote here in Pennsylvania for the November elections. October 21st. Please get registered to vote. There are voting places that you can go. You can register to vote, get your mail-in ballot, and vote all in one day. Get it all done. You're good to go. You can do it online. If you have any questions about registering, any questions about where to go, what this should look like, go to vote.pa.gov or reach out to your county election office, because as we've heard today, they are really, truly passionate about making sure that you're participating in the process and that we have a fair, free election that runs efficiently. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Senator Cappelletti, and I echo your gratitude for our testifiers who drove far to come up here, and also to the staff and of Senator Schwank, Senator Cappelletti, and Gareth, my ED. And also want to thank the IT staff of the House Democratic Policy Committee and the IT staff from our shop here in the Senate Dems, because this is not our normal hearing room, as there's some technical upgrades occurring in the Capitol. So we are grateful for their efforts to make today happen, not have to change the date, and hopefully everything was recorded and sounded good for posting online. And also want to say that we look forward to changing our election laws to eliminate these gaps where causing counties to make do and try to put things together, and that we can work towards increasing accessibility to voting, and that our elections remain fair and free, and that, as Senator Cappelletti mentioned, your county election office is a huge resource, but also vote.pa.gov is another one. Another hearing for another day, but working on all parts of our election laws and campaign finance laws and all of those things, so that people have confidence in this process, confidence in their government. And today, I think, proved that that's achievable, and it is happening. From some tweaking that needs to be done, but it is happening, and that we're grateful for everybody at all of our election offices in 67 counties for the work that they do. It is tireless, thankless work, and without them, these elections would be far more challenging and staffing wise. So I want to say thank you. And as I mentioned, on senatormuth.com/policy, all of the written testimony is uploaded for anyone to review, share as you like, and also the recording of this hearing will be there as well. So thank you for everyone, and let's go out and vote in November. Thank you.